In the vast crystalline halls of the Nexus Galaxy Research Archive on Arcadia 7, the silence was almost reverential. Towering data stacks pulsed with soft blue light, while holographic displays shimmered with star charts and artifact analyses spanning 8 millennia of galactic exploration. It was the year 12432 after expansion, and humanity had long since joined the community of spacefaring civilizations that called the Nexus Galaxy home. Dr. Mira Solara adjusted her ocular enhancers, the frustration evident in her quick, precise movements. For the past 3 years, she had dedicated her career as a xenohistorian to one particular enigma: the obelisk of Viridian. Still at it, Solara? The voice belonged to Dr. Roland Voss, his tall, gaunt frame silhouetted against the archive's panoramic viewports. The gas giant Arcadia loomed beyond, its rings catching the light of the binary stars. "Always," Mira replied, without looking up from the holographic reconstruction floating above her workstation. The obelisk of Viridian rotated slowly in the projection, a monolithic structure of unknown material, discovered on a dead moon in the galactic rim. Its surface was covered in inscriptions that defied conventional translation matrices. 8,600 years, Voss said, circling the projection. That's how long this relic has remained inscrutable. The Mendari couldn't decode it. The Cephali Concordat failed. Even the algorithmic collective hit a wall. His tone was professorial, as if Mira needed reminding of the artifact's notorious history. "What makes you think you'll succeed where entire civilizations have failed?" Mira finally looked up, her dark eyes reflecting the blue glow of the hologram. "Because they all approached it as a code to be broken. I think it's a song to be heard." Voss's laugh was dry and dismissive. "Poetry doesn't earn research grants, Solara." "Musical linguistics isn't poetry," she countered. "The inscriptions aren't static symbols. They're notation. The patterns change based on resonant frequencies. The Council won't approve such an unorthodox methodology. They want results, not concerts." Mira shut down the projection with a gesture. "Then I'll have to be persuasive." The council chambers of the Galactic Research Authority were designed to intimidate. 7 representatives from the major scientific institutions sat on a raised dais, their faces partially obscured by holoscreens displaying Mira's credentials and publication history. "Dr. Solara," began Councillor Thanaris, her voice amplified throughout the chamber, "your proposal to investigate the obelisk of Viridian through musical linguistics is highly irregular. Irregular approaches are warranted when conventional methods have failed for millennia," Mira replied, standing tall despite the palpable skepticism in the room. "You're proposing to divert significant resources from established decryption protocols," said another counselor, an elderly human with cybernetic implants gleaming at his temples. "I'm proposing to complement those protocols, not replace them," Mira clarified. "The obelisk's surface composition resonates at specific frequencies when exposed to certain sound waves. Traditional decryption ignores this property entirely." "Speculation," snapped Dr. Voss from his seat near the council. As the archive's senior archaeologist, his opinion carried weight. "Observation," Mira countered, activating her datapad. A series of readings appeared on the chamber's main display. "These are acoustic measurements I've taken over the past year. The inscriptions subtly shift position when exposed to specific harmonic sequences." A murmur rippled through the chamber. This was new data. "Why wasn't this included in the official archive reports?" Councillor Thanaris asked, glancing pointedly at Voss. "Because they were conducted after hours, using my own equipment," Mira explained. "The archive protocols don't accommodate acoustic testing of this nature." "Unauthorized experimentation," Voss muttered, but the damage was done. The council was intrigued. After an hour of technical questions and debate, Councillor Thanaris called for a vote. Mira held her breath as the decision matrix compiled. The result flashed on the screens. Approved. Provisional status. You have 6 months, Dr. Solara, the Naris announced. Assemble your team and present preliminary findings by the mid-year review. Resources will be allocated accordingly. As the chamber emptied, Voss approached her, his expression unreadable. Congratulations. You've bought yourself half a year to play music to a rock. Thank you for the encouragement, Mira replied with a thin smile. I'll be sure to credit you when we succeed. When, he repeated, raising an eyebrow. Confidence is admirable, but hubris has ended many promising careers. As Voss walked away, Mira allowed herself a moment of doubt. She had 6 months to prove a theory that had come to her in a dream, that the greatest mystery in xenoarchaeology might be solved not through code-breaking, but through song. Mira's first task was assembling a team that could translate her vision into reality. Traditional archaeologists wouldn't suffice. She needed specialists who could think beyond conventional parameters. Nari Tel was her first recruit, a Lyrian linguist whose species' mild telepathic abilities made her uniquely sensitive to emotional patterns in language. Mira found her in the archive's auxiliary linguistics lab, surrounded by ancient texts. You want me to feel the emotions of a dead civilization through their writing? Nari asked, her iridescent eyes widening slightly. I want you to listen for patterns that machines can't detect, Mira clarified. The obelisk's inscriptions may be designed to evoke specific neural responses that your perceptive abilities might catch. Nari considered this. An interesting hypothesis. Unproven, but fascinating. She smiled, revealing the slight phosphorescence characteristic of her species. When do we start? Next came Jax Arno, a human percussion engineer whose specialized knowledge of vibrational mechanics had revolutionized deep space communication. Mira tracked him down in his workshop on the archive's engineering level, where he was calibrating a series of resonant drums. Dr. Solara, he exclaimed, setting down his tools. I've heard rumors about your project. They're saying you want to serenade an alien artifact. Something like that, Mira admitted. I need someone who understands how sound interacts with unusual materials. Someone who can build instruments that produce precise frequencies. Jax gestured to his workshop, filled with devices of his own invention. I'm your man, but fair warning. The archive's traditionalists are already calling this the symphony of failure behind your back. Let them, Mira said with more confidence than she felt. We'll change their tune soon enough. The final member of her core team was Lila Seo, a hollow artist whose visual interpretations of sound had earned her both acclaim and controversy in artistic circles. Mira found her in her studio in Arcadia 7's creative district, surrounded by swirling visualizations of audio waveforms. You're asking me to visualize alien music that we haven't even heard yet? Lila asked, brushing a strand of color-shifting hair from her face. I'm asking you to help us see patterns that might be invisible otherwise, Mira explained. Your synesthetic approach to sound visualization could be the key to understanding how the inscriptions and acoustics interact. Lila studied Mira for a long moment. The scientific community usually dismisses artists as decorative at best. What makes you different? I believe art and science are two approaches to the same truth, Mira said simply. And sometimes, when one fails, the other succeeds. Lila's expression softened. Well, that's the most sensible thing I've heard from a scientist in years. I'm in. With her team assembled, Mira secured Lab 7 in the archive's experimental wing, a large, acoustically isolated chamber with equipment capable of generating and measuring precise sound waves. It took 2 weeks to set up their specialized equipment, during which rumors of their unusual project spread throughout the facility. Their first experiment was straightforward, mapping the obelisk's surface with sound pulses across the audible spectrum. Jax constructed a semicircular array of speakers that surrounded a holographic projection of the obelisk, while Lila programmed visualization parameters to track any minute changes in the inscriptions. Beginning acoustic mapping sequence, Jax announced, initiating the program. A series of tones began to emanate from the speakers, starting at the lowest frequency and gradually ascending. For 3 hours, they watched and waited. The inscriptions remained stubbornly static. "Nothing," Nari said, disappointment evident in her voice. Not even a whisper of emotional resonance. Mira frowned. Her preliminary tests had shown subtle responses. What had changed? "Wait," Lila said suddenly, pointing to her visualization display. There was a micro-shift at 157.8 Hz. Almost imperceptible, but definite. Jax adjusted the equipment to focus on that frequency range. Again, at 173.4 Hz. The pattern changed slightly. "Can we combine those frequencies?" Mira asked. Jax nodded, reconfiguring the sound array. The resulting tone was discordant, almost painful. "Still nothing significant," Nari observed. "Just noise." Mira's excitement dimmed. This was only their first attempt, but she had hoped for more promising results. As they were shutting down for the day, Dr. Voss appeared at the lab entrance. "I hear your first symphony was less than harmonious," he remarked, surveying their equipment with barely concealed skepticism. "First rehearsal," Mira corrected. "We're still tuning our instruments." "The council will expect more than tuning by the mid-year review," Voss reminded her. "Perhaps it's time to consider integrating more traditional decryption methods?" "We'll stick to our approach for now," Mira said firmly. "But thank you for your concern." After Voss departed, Jax turned to Mira. "He's not entirely wrong. We need results, and soon." "We'll get them," Mira assured him, though her confidence was beginning to waver. "Tomorrow, we try a different approach." Days turned into weeks as the team experimented with various acoustic methodologies. They attempted harmonic progressions, rhythmic patterns, even translations of the inscriptions into musical notation, all with minimal success. The inscriptions would occasionally shift or realign, but never in a meaningful pattern that suggested communication or purpose. After a particularly frustrating session, Mira stayed late in the lab, reviewing their accumulated data. There had to be something they were missing, some key variable they hadn't considered. As she scrolled through the acoustic readings, a notification appeared on her console. Their research funding had been reduced by 30%, effective immediately. The council was losing faith in their approach. Mira leaned back in her chair, exhaustion and doubt washing over her. Perhaps Voss was right. Perhaps the obelisk would remain an enigma for another 8,000 years. The lab door slid open, and Nari entered, carrying 2 cups of stimulant. "You look like you could use this," she said, offering one to Mira. "Thanks," Mira accepted gratefully. "Have you seen the latest council decision?" Nari nodded. "Jax told me. It's disappointing." "It's politics," Mira corrected. "Voss has supporters on the council who never approved of our approach." "Then we must succeed despite them," Nari said simply. "I've been thinking about our methodology. We've been treating the obelisk as if it exists in isolation. But what if its creators designed it to respond to its environment?" Mira frowned. "The moon where it was discovered is dead. No atmosphere. No geological activity. Now, yes. But when it was created, perhaps the rhythms of that world were part of the key." Mira sat up straighter, her mind racing. Seismic patterns, planetary rotations, orbital mechanics translated into rhythm. "Precisely," Nari smiled. "Every world has its own song. Perhaps the obelisk was designed to harmonize with its native environment." "We need historical seismic data from Viridian's moon," Mira said, already accessing the archive's geological database, "and orbital calculations for the period when the obelisk was likely constructed." "I'll inform Jax and Lila," Nari said, her iridescent eyes gleaming with renewed hope. With their funding cut, the team had to improvise. They repurposed equipment, worked during off hours to save energy credits, and pooled their personal resources to continue their research. Jax built a new resonator array capable of reproducing the complex seismic patterns of Viridian's moon, while Lila developed visualization algorithms that incorporated orbital mechanics into her holographic displays. Their breakthrough came 3 months into the project, during a late-night session when the archive was nearly deserted. They had programmed a composite rhythm based on the ancient seismic activity of Viridian's moon, combined with harmonics derived from its orbital resonance with neighboring planets. As the sequence played, the inscriptions on their holographic model of the obelisk began to shift, not randomly, but in coordinated patterns that rippled across its surface like waves. "It's responding!" Lila exclaimed, her fingers dancing across her console as she captured the changes. "There's a distinct emotional pattern emerging," Nari added, her eyes half closed in concentration. "Not language exactly, but intent, purpose." Mira watched in awe as the inscriptions rearranged themselves into new configurations. "Jax, can you intensify the lunar diurnal rhythm?" Jax adjusted the parameters, and the movement of the inscriptions accelerated. Symbols flowed and merged, forming what appeared to be star-like patterns across the obelisk's surface. "It's a map," Mira whispered. "A star map." The excitement in Lab 7 was palpable, but their discovery was still partial. The star map was incomplete, fragmented. They could recognize certain constellations, but the overall pattern remained elusive. More troubling, they couldn't reproduce the effect consistently. Sometimes the inscriptions would respond dramatically. Other times, they remained stubbornly static despite identical acoustic inputs. "There's still a missing element," Mira admitted during their team meeting the following day. "Something environmental that we haven't accounted for." "Could it be something as simple as temperature?" Jax suggested. "Materials respond differently to sound based on thermal conditions." "Or light," Lila added. "My visualizations suggest the inscriptions might be photosensitive as well as acoustic." "Or perhaps it requires a specific emotional context," Nari said thoughtfully. "Many ancient artifacts were designed to respond to the emotional states of their users." Mira considered these possibilities. "We need to test all these variables systematically, but we're running out of time. The mid-year review is in 3 weeks. And resources," Jax reminded her. "We can't afford much more specialized equipment with our reduced budget." As they debated their next steps, Dr. Voss appeared at the lab entrance, accompanied by 2 members of the council, Thanaris and her chief scientific advisor. "Dr. Solara," Thanaris greeted her. "We've come to evaluate your progress directly." Mira exchanged glances with her team. They weren't prepared for an official inspection, but there was no avoiding it now. "Of course," she said, gesturing to their setup. "We've made significant progress in understanding how the obelisk responds to environmental acoustic patterns." "So we've heard," Voss said, his tone skeptical. "Something about a star map?" "A partial map," Mira clarified. "We've managed to trigger a reconfiguration of the inscriptions using rhythmic patterns derived from Viridian's moon." "Can you demonstrate this effect?" Thanaris asked. "We can try," Mira said carefully. "The response is not yet consistent. We're still refining our parameters." Jax initiated the acoustic sequence they had used during their breakthrough, while Lila activated the holographic model. The inscriptions began to shift, but more subtly than before. The clear star patterns they had observed previously were barely discernible. "This is your significant progress?" Voss asked, making no attempt to hide his disappointment. "The effect was much more pronounced yesterday," Mira explained. "We're still identifying all the variables that influence the response." "Variables," Voss repeated. "Or perhaps wishful thinking. It's possible you're seeing patterns where none exist. Dr. Solara." Before Mira could respond, Nari stepped forward. "With respect, Dr. Voss, the patterns are real. I've sensed the emotional resonance myself. This is not imagination. It's communication." Lyrian empathic impressions are hardly scientific evidence, Voss dismissed. Actually, they are, countered Thanaris, surprising everyone. Lyrian perceptive abilities have been validated in numerous studies. If specialist Tell senses emotional patterns, that's significant data. Voss frowned but didn't argue further. Nevertheless, Thanaris continued, turning to Mira, the Council needs more concrete results by the mid-year review. Your approach is intriguing, but without reproducible effects. We cannot justify continued resource allocation. After they departed, the lab fell silent. The pressure was mounting, and their most promising lead remained frustratingly inconsistent. We need to try something different, Mira said finally. Something unexpected. Like what? Jax asked. Mira thought for a moment, then smiled. Like combining all our disciplines at once. Nari, what if we incorporate your emotional impressions directly into the acoustic pattern? Jax can modulate the frequencies based on your readings in real time. A feedback loop, Jax said, nodding slowly. It could work. And Lila, I want you to create a visual sonata. Translate the star patterns we've identified so far into a musical composition. Then feed that back into our acoustic array. Lila's eyes widened. You want to play the stars back to the obelisk? Exactly, Mira confirmed. If the obelisk is showing us a star map, let's respond by singing those stars back to it. It was an audacious approach, requiring intricate coordination between their various systems. For the next 2 weeks, they worked tirelessly, developing a complex interplay of sound, emotion, and light that they hoped would unlock the obelisk's full message. Their efforts were complicated by increasing scrutiny from the Archives administration. Dr. Voss had requested daily progress reports, and other researchers began to drop by the lab with suspicious frequency. The pressure was taking its toll on the team. They're waiting for us to fail, Jax muttered one evening, as they calibrated the new feedback system. Then we won't fail, Mira said simply. We're close, I can feel it. So can I, Nari agreed. The emotional resonance is growing stronger with each attempt. There's a sense of anticipation in the patterns now. The day before the mid-year review, disaster struck. A solar flare from Arcadia's binary stars disrupted power throughout the archive, damaging some of their specialized equipment. Jax's primary resonator array, the heart of their acoustic system, was rendered inoperable. Can we repair it in time? Mira asked, surveying the damage. Jax shook his head grimly. Not without parts we can't afford. We might be able to cobble together something functional, but it won't have the precision we need. What about the secondary arrays? Lila suggested. They don't have the range or power, Jax explained. We need the full spectrum to reproduce the effect. Mira stared at the damaged equipment, her mind racing. After coming so close, to be defeated by a random solar event seemed cruel. But perhaps. The solar flare, she said suddenly. What if that's it? What do you mean? Nari asked. We've been trying to reproduce the conditions of Viridian's moon, but we've ignored the star system itself. What if solar activity is part of the key? It's possible, Jax admitted. Stellar radiation can affect how materials respond to acoustic stimulation. Lila, can you incorporate solar flare patterns into your visual sonata? Mira asked. I can, but without the primary resonator array. We'll have to improvise, Mira decided. Jax, what if we use the Archive's acoustic dampening system in reverse? It's designed to neutralize external sounds. But if we reconfigure it, we could turn the entire lab into one massive resonator, Jax finished, his eyes lighting up. It's risky. We could damage the Archive systems, but it might work. They spent the night reconfiguring the lab's environmental systems, essentially turning the room itself into a giant instrument. By morning, they were exhausted but ready. The mid-year review was scheduled for noon, and representatives from the Galactic Tribunal would be present alongside the Council. As the hour approached, The lab filled with officials and observers. Dr. Voss arrived early, inspecting their makeshift setup with raised eyebrows. Ingenious adaptation, he admitted reluctantly. Though I question the wisdom of repurposing archive systems without authorization. Desperate times, Mira replied. Besides, we've taken precautions. When Counselor Thanaris arrived with the tribunal representatives, the tension in the lab was palpable. Mira stepped forward to address them. Distinguished representatives, thank you for your presence today. What we're about to demonstrate represents a new approach to understanding the obelisk of Viridian, one that integrates acoustic science with emotional linguistics and visual harmonics. Proceed, Dr. Solara, Thanaris said. We're eager to see these results. Mira nodded to her team. Lila activated the holographic model of the obelisk, while Nari prepared to monitor and input emotional resonance data. Jax stood at the modified control console, ready to coordinate the lab's acoustic systems. We begin with the rhythmic patterns of Viridian's moon, Mira explained, as a deep, pulsing sound filled the lab. The holographic obelisk shimmered slightly, its inscriptions beginning to shift. Now we add stellar harmonics, based on the binary system where the obelisk was found. Jax added a layer of higher frequencies, creating a complex counterpoint to the lunar rhythm. The inscriptions moved more actively now, forming partial patterns similar to what they had seen before. Several council members leaned forward, their interest piqued. Next, we incorporate emotional resonance feedback, translated into acoustic waves. Nari closed her eyes, focusing her perceptive abilities on the shifting patterns. A new layer of sound emerged, haunting, almost vocal. The inscriptions were now flowing freely across the obelisk's surface, forming recognizable constellations. Murmurs of appreciation spread through the observers. Finally, Mira announced, we complete the dialogue by playing back the star map itself, translated into what we call the Ancestral Sonata. Lila activated the final sequence, a musical composition based on the partial star map they had decoded, enhanced with patterns from recent solar activity. The sound that filled the lab was unlike anything the observers had heard before, mathematical, yet emotional, alien yet strangely familiar. The effect on the obelisk was immediate and dramatic. The inscriptions began to flow like liquid, merging and separating in complex patterns. The star map that had been fragmentary before now expanded, revealing a complete celestial cartography that spanned the holographic display. It's showing us the entire Nexus galaxy, gasped one of the tribunal scientists, as it appeared 8,000 years ago. But the obelisk wasn't finished. As the Ancestral Sonata reached its crescendo, a new pattern emerged at the center of the star map, a specific location highlighted by pulsing symbols. The Viridian Nebula, Mira identified. That's the origin point. Origin of what? Thanaris asked, her voice hushed with awe. Of the civilization that created the obelisk, Mira explained. They weren't leaving us a puzzle. They were leaving us directions. The obelisk is a beacon, designed to guide lost colonies back to their ancestral home. The revelation stunned the audience into silence. 8 millennia of mystery, solved in a single moment of harmonic convergence. Then, without warning, the lab's systems began to overload. Sparks flew from Jax's console, and the acoustic resonance grew painfully intense. Power surge! Jax shouted over the noise. The lab's dampeners are failing. Shut it down, ordered Voss. But it was too late. The resonance had become self-sustaining, feeding back between their equipment and the archive systems. The dome integrity is compromised, warned a security officer as alarms began to sound throughout the facility. If the acoustic resonance reaches the main structural supports. I can stabilize it, Mira interrupted, rushing to Lila's console. Keep playing the Ancestral Sonata, but reverse the phase of the stellar harmonics. Lila complied, her fingers dancing across the controls. The discordant resonance gradually shifted, becoming harmonious once more. The alarms fell silent, and the holographic obelisk stabilized, its star map still gloriously displayed. "How did you know that would work?" Voss asked, his face pale from the near disaster. "Because the obelisk isn't just a message, it's a tool," Mira explained. Its creators designed it to resonate with stellar systems, to stabilize or destabilize them as needed. They were stellar engineers, and this was their greatest achievement. In the aftermath of the demonstration, the council chamber was filled beyond capacity. Scientists, diplomats, and media representatives crowded the galleries as Councillor Thanaris formally addressed the assembly. "Dr. Mira Solara and her team have achieved what countless civilizations could not," she announced. "They have decoded the obelisk of Viridian, revealing it to be not merely an artifact, but a functional beacon designed to unite a scattered civilization." Murmurs of approval rippled through the chamber. "Furthermore," Thanaris continued, "preliminary analysis confirms that the stellar map corresponds to actual celestial coordinates. The Viridian Nebula exists, and expeditions are already being planned to explore this ancestral home of the obelisk's creators." Mira stood with her team, still somewhat in shock from their success. Beside them, surprisingly, stood Dr. Voss, who had requested to address the assembly. "I wish to acknowledge my error," Voss said when given the floor. "I dismissed Dr. Solara's approach as unscientific, as playing music to a rock. I failed to recognize that true innovation often requires us to transcend established methodologies." He turned to face Mira directly. "Your success reminds us all that science and art are not opposing disciplines, but complementary approaches to understanding our universe. I congratulate you and your team unreservedly." The formal recognition was gratifying, but for Mira, the real triumph came 3 days later, when they received permission to test their discovery on the actual obelisk. A secure transmission chamber was established, allowing them to send the ancestral sonata directly to the research outpost on Viridian's moon. As the composition played across millions of kilometers of space, sensors recorded the obelisk's response. Its inscriptions flowed, just as they had in the holographic model. But with one crucial difference. They began to glow, emitting pulses of light that shot upward into space. "It's activating," Mira whispered, watching the real-time feed. "The beacon is active." Within hours, similar reports began arriving from across the galaxy. Ancient artifacts, long thought to be mere monuments or curiosities, were responding to the obelisk's signal. A network of beacons, dormant for millennia, had awakened. "They're everywhere," Nari marveled as they watched the reports flood in. "Hundreds of colonies, all connected by this network." "Thousands," corrected Lila, studying the expanding map of activations. "And they all point back to the Viridian Nebula." The implications were staggering. An ancient civilization, perhaps driven from their home by some cosmic catastrophe, had scattered throughout the galaxy, leaving behind these beacons to one day reunite their descendants. The obelisk wasn't just a historical artifact. It was changing the present, reshaping the future of galactic society. 1 month after their discovery, Mira stood on the observation deck of the archive, watching the first expedition ships depart for the Viridian Nebula. The fleet was a collaboration between multiple species and governments, united by curiosity about this ancestral civilization. "Quite a view," said a familiar voice. Dr. Voss joined her at the viewport, his expression contemplative. "It's just the beginning," Mira replied. "We've only decoded the most basic function of the obelisk. There are deeper layers to its message, aspects we're still struggling to understand. And yet, you've accomplished more in 6 months than generations of researchers before you," Voss noted. "Because you were willing to listen to the artifact, not just analyze it." "Music and mathematics are universal languages," Mira said. "Perhaps the most universal. The obelisk's creators understood that harmony transcends cultural and temporal barriers. Voss nodded slowly. A lesson we would do well to remember. He hesitated, then added, "The Council has approved a new division within the archive, the Department of Harmonic Archaeology. They've asked me to recommend a director." Mira turned to him, surprised. "And have you made your recommendation?" "I have," Voss confirmed. "Though I suspect Dr. Mira Solara might be too busy with her continued research on the obelisk network to accept such an administrative position." Mira smiled. "You might be right about that. But I know someone who combines administrative experience with a newly acquired appreciation for interdisciplinary approaches." Voss raised an eyebrow. "Me? After I opposed your methods so vehemently?" "Because you were willing to admit you were wrong," Mira said simply. "That's rarer than you might think, especially in academic circles." Below them, the last expedition ship broke orbit, its drive flaring brilliantly against the backdrop of space. Somewhere ahead of them lay the answers to questions that had puzzled scholars for millennia: the origin of an advanced civilization that had spread its children among the stars, leaving behind the means to find their way home. As Mira watched the ships disappear into the distance, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had begun with a theory dismissed as fantasy, pursued by a team of specialists whose diverse approaches had been seen as a weakness rather than a strength. Now, that same diversity of thought had unlocked one of the greatest mysteries of galactic history. The obelisk of Viridian was no longer an enigma, but a beacon, guiding lost civilizations home, just as the integration of art and science had guided Mira and her team to the truth. In the vastness of the cosmos, it was harmony that created understanding, resonance that built connections across the void. And as the beacon network continued to awaken across the galaxy, its message spreading from world to world, star to star, Mira knew that the universe would never be quite the same again. A single human scientist, working with a team of dedicated specialists, had solved an ancient alien mystery, and the galaxy would never forget.